Tractate Makkos discusses the principles of court-administered punishments, laws of false testimony, and the process of disproving witnesses. Chapter 1 begins discussing these laws of false witnesses. Witnesses which testify in court can be proven to be false, lying, and giving false testimony, in which case they would receive reciprocal punishment, meaning the punishment they intended to give through their testimony they would in turn receive. There are exceptions to this. If witnesses testify that a Kohen is of illegitimate birth and they're proven to be false, they're not punished to attain the status of somebody with illegitimate birth. Rather, they would receive 40 lashes. Another exception, if the witnesses testify to have somebody be exiled and they're proven false, they're not exiled in turn. Instead, again, they just receive 40 lashes. The Gemara explains the unique wording is, as this Mishnah is a continuation of the last Mishnah in the prior Tractate Sanhedrin, which deals with this topic. It also brings the scriptural sources for the listed exceptions to the reciprocal punishment principle. It additionally qualifies the sources, quoting verses showing how they allude to these rules as to that the exceptions apply, negating the punishment, and also that they're additionally replaced with the substitute punishment of lashes. Besides for the two listed exceptions where there's no reciprocal punishment for false witnesses, it mentions some others. There would not be a reciprocal punishment to pay the kofer atonement payment if somebody's dangerous ox gored somebody, as was mentioned back in Tractate Bava Kama, and there would be no reciprocal punishment of being sold as a slave. Additionally, some say that this reciprocal payment, which by the way is called hazama, is not paid if it's based on the false witness's own confession. It further qualifies these other exceptions. The kofer payment would not be paid by the animal, as it's held by some that this is a payment done as atonement, which would apply to the actual owner of the murdering animal, but not towards a false witness on the case. There is debate as to how this kofer payment would be assessed, if it's in accordance with the value of the victim or the damager. It also debates what's referred to, that false witnesses can't reciprocally be sold into slavery, and it said that this applies in all cases. According to the opinion that the reciprocal punishment is not granted if it's based on the false witness's own testimony, this is, as this opinion holds, the penalty is considered to be like a fine, which is not paid based on somebody's own admission. Further, it's also said that the false witnesses pay according to their share, which is interpreted to mean that if one of the false witnesses shows up to a second court and admits his guilt in testifying falsely along with his partners, he has viably made himself obligated to pay his share of the penalty. New Mishnah. In the case that witnesses testify that somebody divorced their wife and did not pay the kasuba, the marriage contract, if the witnesses are then proven to be false, they should theoretically need to pay a reciprocal payment to the husband of the value of the marriage contract. However, on the other hand, it's not really considered to have been a total loss of the marriage contract by the husband, as he'd end up having to pay it eventually anyways, so instead the false witnesses need to pay the reciprocal payment of what a person would pay to the woman for the rights to her marriage contract. The Gemara says, it's a debate if this payment is based on the value of the position of the husband or the wife, or perhaps it's on the wife but only by what's designated for payment within the marriage contract. New Mishnah. If witnesses testify that a man owes another person 1,000 zuz, a type of coin, stipulated to be repaid within 30 days, and it's found that they were false witnesses, that the coins were actually owed, but within a deadline of 10 years, the witnesses would need to repay the amount that a person would give to have the loan extended from 30 days to 10 years. The Gemara says, related, if somebody lends somebody money for 10 years, the sabbatical year, Shemitah, cancels this loan. Our Mishnah still has the witnesses pay an assessment for a loan's worth within 10 years in spite of this, as our case is where either the money was lent on collateral or the loan documents were given to the court, in which case the sabbatical year would not cancel the loan. There's some variation on this. Some also say that if a loan is given on condition that the borrower not cancel the loan during the sabbatical year, the loan is not cancelled. However, if you said that the loan is given on condition that the sabbatical year not cancel it, it would nevertheless still be cancelled. It said elsewhere if a loan is given without specifying a due date, the lender cannot demand repayment within 30 days, which is based on some verses. It's a debate if this applies to only written loans or also to verbal loans. It also mentions some related teachings from the sage who brought this, such as that there's liability for making a neck hole in a garment on Shabbos, unlike removing the lid of a barrel, as the lid of a barrel is not entirely attached. The other ruling was that if 3 lugin of drawn water mixed with a tiny amount of wine, discoloring the mixture to wine color, and this then falls into a mikvah, the mikvah is not invalidated, as this liquid is considered to be diluted wine, not improper water. It additionally qualifies some water and wine ratios in regards to discoloration and the laws of invalidating a mikvah. New Mishnah. According to Rabbi Meir, if two witnesses falsely testify that a man owes another person 200 zuz coins, they receive lashes as punishment for the false testimony and also have to repay the 200 coins. This is as there are two separate verses which source these respective punishments. The sages simply say if somebody needs to repay, they don't additionally receive lashes. Similarly, according to Rabbi Meir, if two witnesses falsely testify that a man committed a transgression, making him liable for lashes, they would receive 40 lashes as punishment for the false testimony, and also receive 40 more lashes for the attempted punishment. The sages simply say they only receive the first 40 lashes. The Gemara says, the source for Rabbi Meir, who holds there's two separate punishments, sources this additionally from a comparison to somebody who defames their wife. they would get a punishment of lashes and also a fine, so this principle seemingly would also apply here. This comparison is discussed further, and it additionally explains how each opinion uses the particularly mentioned verses. New Mishnah. If the false witnesses need to pay a monetary charge, it's divided between them. For instance, if they owe 200 coins total, they would each individually pay 100. If it's lashes, it's not divided, meaning if they're receiving 40 lashes, they would each individually receive 40. The Gemara quotes scriptural sources for this point, and also for the concept that money combines to create a reciprocal payment, while lashes just don't combine at all, so must be repaid separately. New Mishnah. Witnesses can only become false witnesses if directly discredited based on other witnesses. For instance, if witnesses testify a man is a murderer, and then other witnesses testify the murderer was with them in a different place when the murder occurred, this is a good refutation of their argument, but it doesn't give the first witnesses the legal status of false witnesses, called zomimim, to make them receive these described punishments. However, if the testimony is directly against them, for instance, the second witnesses testify that the first witnesses themselves were somewhere else during the murder, they would receive the punishment they tried to give, in this case, capital punishment. If multiple other groups of false witnesses come and try to testify somebody committed murder, and there are counter witnesses against them, some say all the false witnesses receive capital punishment, others say they're considered to be one group, so only the first set of witnesses receive this punishment. The Gemara quotes scriptural sources for these rulings. It brings a case if two witnesses testify a murder occurred in the east wing of a building, and other witnesses say, no, the first witnesses were in the west wing when the murder took place, they need to check if the east wing is visible from the west wing to determine if they're considered to be false witnesses. The possibility that the first witnesses just had unusually good eyesight is not considered. There's a related ruling mentioned about people testifying to a murder occurring in one city, and others testifying that they were in a different city that day. They should check if it's possible to travel between those cities in one day without concerning the possibility of using an unusually fast camel. It's additionally stated if witnesses testify a man committed murder on Sunday, and then other witnesses testify that's not possible as the witnesses were nowhere near the location, but the murder did actually occur on a Monday, then the first witnesses still would receive capital punishment as the murderer was not yet proven when they had testified. It brings related rulings. It also brings another case. A woman brought witnesses who were proven false, and then brought another set of witnesses who were also proven false, and then went and brought a third pair of witnesses. So some said to just automatically not believe them, others said we should give them a shot, as though the woman was proven dishonest, the new witnesses hadn't yet been. It debates these opinions. New Mishnah. False witnesses were not executed for their false testimony on a capital punishment case unless the verdict on the accused had been given before they were proven to be false witnesses. It gives the sources for this from some verses. The Gemara quotes a discussion which states that if the false witnesses testify and the man they're testifying against is pending execution and they're proven to be false, they're executed in turn. However, if the defendant had actually been executed and they're proven to be false, they would not receive punishment. The liability here cannot just be learned from the more lenient former case, as it said that punishments cannot be established based on this type of logical deduction, which is sourced. It also mentioned scriptural sources for the fact that false witnesses are only punished if the verdict has been given before they were found out, whether for lashes or for exile, if it discusses these principles. New Mishnah. The verse says, by the word of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall the one who is to die be put to death. The mention of 3 witnesses here is seemingly redundant, and it's to teach that it's possible for 2 witnesses to discredit 3 witnesses as false witnesses through their testimony. The extra word witnesses in the verse teaches that 2 witnesses can actually discredit any number of false witnesses. Some say the particularities in the verse are to teach that the false witnesses only receive punishment if every single one of them are proven to be false. Others add as to teach that the third witness receives the same punishment as the first 2. This additionally teaches us that if there's such stringencies for the accomplice to a crime, then so too there would be such great reward for the accomplice to a good deed. Additionally, the verse teaches that if one of the 3 witnesses is invalidated as a relative or otherwise, the testimony of the remaining 2 is also disqualified. Some hold this would only apply in a case of capital punishment, others say it also applies in a monetary case, so long as the disqualified witness had warned the criminal prior to committing the crime, thereby choosing to act as a witness and thereby becoming part of the group of witnesses. This is necessary to state, as otherwise if 2 brothers saw somebody commit murder, both of them would be automatically invalidated as witnesses. The Gemara mentions the fact that several hundred witnesses are all viewed and affected as one group. That's only if each of them makes their testimony in the amount of time that it takes to greet somebody after the prior witness. It's also said that the victim of the crime, whether a murdered or assaulted individual, can be considered a witness so as to disqualify the testimony of the other witnesses. It qualifies how the court determines whether the disqualified witness had intended to act as a witness by asking a series of questions, and it's a debate as to who the final law holds like. New Mishnah. If somebody was committing a crime and a set of witnesses saw him from one window and a separate set of witnesses saw him from a different window, and somebody else warned the man not to commit the crime, thereby making the man liable for capital punishment, if the witnesses could see each other, they're considered to be one set of witnesses and would all be disqualified and proven false and punished together. If they could not see each other, they're considered to be 2 separate groups. Others say the man only receives capital punishment if he's warned by the actual witnesses, which is based on the verse, by the word of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall the one who is to die be put to death. Others say this verse is to teach that the Sanhedrin should not hear testimony through an interpreter. The Gemara also says this would apply with single witnesses, that if they're both isolated from each other, they don't have a valid testimony, which it brings sources for. It's also said that if the witnesses are in different windows, they combine if they see the man giving the warning, or if the warning man sees them. It's also said that the man warning to not commit a crime can be basically anybody, even the victim himself, or even a demon. It's a debate as to if single isolated witnesses are valid in a monetary case. There are further points. It also says the court shouldn't have an interpreter to understand testimony, but they could have an interpreter to speak to the witnesses. It also brings a case where it says that the relatives to the co-signer of a loan were invalid as witnesses to the loan, as the lender could hold the co-signer responsible for the debt. New Mishnah. If a person was sentenced to death and escaped and is later brought back to court, they follow through with the execution immediately without retrying him. It's also said if 2 witnesses testify that a man has been sentenced to death at a different court based on other mentioned witnesses, they should carry out the punishment there. The laws of the Sanhedrin judging cases apply inside and outside of Israel. It's also said that a Sanhedrin, a court that executes a person once in 7 years, and according to some once in 70 years, is called a destroyer, or bloodthirsty, as a court should always try ways to exonerate the defendant and use capital punishment as a last possible resort. Some sages, Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva, had said that if they were part of the Sanhedrin back when capital punishment used to be done, there wouldn't have been a single execution. Others said that that would have been improper, as then there would have been more criminals. The Gemara clarifies the first 2 rulings, that a court only immediately re-rules capital punishment if the criminal is brought to the same court within Israel. Outside of Israel, so long as witnesses testify, he could be punished in different courts. It brings sources for this and for the remaining points. It also explains how Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva could have chosen to not rule capital punishment by asking for extremely particular testimony that witnesses wouldn't have been able to answer so as to not have to execute anybody. Examples are given. And that's the end of chapter 1.